All right, so we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay. Madam Mayor, members of the council, thanks for making time tonight. Councilmember Scott let me know this afternoon that he was unfortunately not going to be able to make it. But today, as we discussed at the May council meeting, our conversation, main topics of agenda today are poop. So we're going to get straight into that. So the first topic is the wastewater treatment plant facility study presentation. I'm going to give a little bit background on the study. I'll let Joe talk about operation of the plant, its background, and the operations he wants to bring you up to describe for you, and then Mr. Dave Reese with Woodseth will actually go through kind of the study overall and what their findings and recommendations are. So again, this kicked off. Really started having discussions about this in 2022 when I started getting to know the city, started talking about facilities. Joe brought up the concerns of the wastewater treatment facility getting to a point where it might be hitting capacity, or what the MPCA refers to as like 85% number is what they kind of use as their benchmark, because once you hit that number, you've got to start doing something. And I felt concerned that we were getting very close to that. So that's when, as part of the 2023 budget cycle, we talked to the council about doing a budgeting to have a study done on the facility, where we were with storage, how long do we think we have, and then also what needs to be done moving into the future to make sure we're obviously providing adequate treatment for the years to come. And then that was done, spent pretty much all of 2023 working on that. And then now we're here today to actually discuss the results. So with that, Joe, I'll hand it over to you if you want to talk about the facility itself.
Sure, thank you. Facility was built in 1978. Listed the upgrades, additions to the facility in its history. You know, we've had 2 ponds added, 5 different spray fields. And then, discussing the previous studies we did, 2001 study, 2011 study, those are attached. They both point to the same direction as far as pond size, pond location, time frame. 2020s is what they were predicting, 20 and 10 years ago. As David mentioned, the capacity issue with the winter storage is probably the hardest concept to understand, because the capacity, storage capacity, it's determined for 6 months. Winter, that's what we call our winter storage capacity. The reality is April and October are considered when we discharge water, and most years we don't get to use all of April or even some of April, and then October we're losing half. So essentially, it's designed for a 6-month winter storage, but some years we're seeing a couple weeks added, could be a month of storage that wasn't designed to be there, and those were the issues that we were seeing as far as we need to start thinking about what to do next. When as far as doing spray field capacity, that's very simple. We have a meter, it measures the water that gets pumped out. There's a 72.1 million gallon limit. I mean, that's very simple. The water coming into the sewer plant, that's metered. We know how much water comes in. The pond storage is definitely the most confusing topic, I guess, in my experience, trying to explain, where it's at. The reason that it's important is, if you exceed it, the water perks over your barriers, the side of the dikes get saturated with water, muddy, can cause, significant problems. It's the one item you don't want to get caught not prepared for. I guess it's the hardest one to construct. It's the most expensive one. As David mentioned, the facility itself is towards end of life, absolutely. A lot of our aeration systems and power supply for our irrigation system, we're dealing with over 40-year-old equipment, the breakers, the electric. It's getting, it's towards the end of its life as well. I mean, and that was kind of the focus of the study. Those two items, try to nail things down a little bit better, time frames, the process, what we all need to do. Dave will handle, that discussion. Do you have any questions for me on any of the information or anything specific with the wastewater treatment facility?
None for me at this time.
Okay.
None for me.
Dave?
Evening. I'm Dave Reese. Once again, speaking to you about everyone's favorite subject, wastewater. We'll go through basically the figures that are out of the facility plan, which is what this effort is called. A facility plan is basically a study. It's what the MPCA asks the city to prepare when you start to get to this point of 85% or so of your capacity, so that you're doing proactive planning to expand your facility as may be needed with your growth. So it's a big investment. The study phase is usually followed by budgeting discussions about how to fund the recommended improvements. Then a design phase. So looking at some of the next steps toward the end of the design phase, there may be land acquisition, seeking of funding assistance unless the city has funds available. And then once all of that's in place, the project would be let for public bidding, typically followed by a construction period. So just to lay that process out as how these typically go forward. All of that process takes time. That's why you need to start kind of where you're at right now with a facility plan. It can take 3, 4, 5 years to get through this process and get to a construction phase. So I think your Public Works department, led by Joe, is doing a very good job of getting ahead of this with this facility planning at this stage. And we'll get more into the time frames as we go along. So we're at the beginning of the study, facility plan stage. The study itself is roughly a 100-page document. We'll just hit some of the key points here tonight with the figures. Hopefully they show up so everybody can see them up there or on your screens. The first one take a look at is Appendix A, the kind of overall collection system map. And what's highlighted in green are the lift stations. Zooming out, you can see that the collection system for Breezy Point covers a good share of the city, but not all of the city. There are many unsewered lots throughout the city. Basically, what they do, the collection system goes from lift station to lift station and brings the wastewater down to the intersection of Thrain and County 4. And that lift station, the main lift station, pumps it over to the wastewater treatment facility, which is on the south end. If you can scroll down, and there on the bottom, you can see the spray irrigation fields. And we have an exhibit that shows the actual properties that the city owns. So that's kind of the end result of a collection system. Your city is served in the most dense areas. Density is important to make any wastewater system fiscally feasible from a construction and operation and maintenance standpoint. The gravity mains, pipes, and manholes are in streets, typically bringing all of that down from private service lines, collecting from each lot. Let's see, when we get to the wastewater treatment facility on the south side, as Joe mentioned, that's composed of wastewater treatment ponds. Some of these ponds are aerated. Others are secondary ponds. And from those ponds, it's pumped to the spray irrigation. You have a headworks facility that consists of a bar screen to take out the larger materials that are collected from the collection system. And then you have a flow measurement flume in that headworks facility, and then your controls that help you control the spray irrigation system. I'm going to figure 3. And zooming out just a little bit, that shows the actual properties that the city owns. And so you're not using all of the property that the city owns at this present time, so it's good. You have some options available with some additional property there. In that respect, you're a step ahead of several other communities, and that's where the property acquisition element sometimes comes in. So the two main components for needing the land is the treatment facility and then spray irrigation. This facility treats its wastewater to a high level. It's not fit for drinking, obviously, but good for spray irrigation where the vegetation, the trees help with kind of that final treatment, if you will, taking up the nutrients as it goes into the soil. Okay, we can go to Appendix C. So just to zoom in a little bit on the wastewater treatment facility, as mentioned, we've got a series of ponds there. This is a very common treatment system for rural Minnesota, where you have the area and acreage available to do that. Spray irrigation is a very common method of distributing that treated effluent without rivers and streams and that sort of discharge option available to a lot of rural communities. This is very typical of an outstate Minnesota system. The operation of ponds and spray irrigation is always a cost factor that you have to look at, as opposed to operating other types of systems. Generally, they're fairly easy from the standpoint of the type of treatment processes that are being done. If we were to replace this with a alternative treatment facility, a mechanical treatment plant, you would be involved in a lot of different costs and different processes, and even maybe a different classification of operator. We talked a little bit about where the wastewater comes in through the Headworks building just south of Pond 1. Then it works its way through the pond system, where aeration and the organisms within the wastewater ponds that are aerobic help to break down the wastewater into different components that are essentially nutrients. Sludge accumulates on the bottom of these ponds, and every so often the city will need to deal with the accumulation of sludge, or biosolids as it's called. But that's not a frequent episode, if you will. It's fairly spread out. It depends on your waste stream coming in.
Is that considered a hazardous material?
Oftentimes it's pumped out and spread on agricultural fields that are permitted through the MPCA. It is highly regulated so that it has to have a crop, a cover crop that takes up that nutrient, and done during certain times of the year. You may have heard of some of those biosolids being treated to a level where they can be used like on golf courses, but that's treating it to a much higher level beyond typically what a city like Breezy Point would do. Okay. So after the water has gone through the pond system, as we mentioned, it's sprayed out into the irrigation fields, and you have the control systems in place to manage that and apply so much water per acre across the area that you have. You can add to this system if you need to. But as Joe mentioned, it's kind of more of a pond capacity issue to begin with than spray irrigation. So when it comes to looking at the timeline, it's probably pond capacity first and then spray irrigation to think about after that. Okay. All right. Move on to Appendix D. Appendix D has a lot of numbers, so I'll try not to get lost in them, but they go to the discussion when it comes to kind of what forecasting what timeline is for needing to do something and kind of what your capacity is. Okay? So across the top are columns for the year, total influent, all the water that goes to the treatment facility, the winter influent, which you have to store over the winter months, summer influent, and effluent irrigation. And then the next two columns are a couple of different ways to look at growth projections. There's a total population column, and then there's an ERU column. Is everybody familiar what ERU stands for? It's a common term, equivalent residential unit. It's basically the equivalent of a typical home, okay? It's important from the standpoint that when we look at commercial properties, they vary across the board in what kind of wastewater they're contributing to your system. Some are like a typical home. Some use a lot of water. Maybe a restaurant is 10 equivalent homes. So we'd say that's 10 ERUs. Okay. As mentioned before, the entire city is not on the wastewater system, so your population might increase, but that does not automatically equate to an increase in wastewater flow. So that gets a little tricky when you think about it. There's a kind of a loose link between the two, and it gets closer as more of the city gets connected to the system. We talked about ERUs briefly, and how businesses and residences are kind of brought to a common denominator. So when all the city's ERUs are added up, that's a way to predict the growth in your wastewater system. Far right column's an estimate of how many ERUs are left if there are no improvements made to the wastewater treatment system. So you go all the way over. At the time of this study, we're looking at 146 ERUs of capacity within your system. Just also, I should mention that everything up to 2023 is actual hard data. Everything beyond 2023 is a projection. Okay. So looking at the growth in the wastewater, try to predict so we can look ahead at what type of improvements and when need to be made. So getting to the 80 to 85% of full capacity, we're looking at studying, designing, and constructing new improvements. Looking at the rows, going year by year, there's a couple of rows to point out. First is the design year, what we call the design year, and that is 2023. Typically, infrastructure has a planning horizon that's out 20 years, 20-year window. So that would be 2043. We don't have, that's the second page of this, which I did not give to you, but it's in the report. The important things we wanted to cover are on this first page, okay? So after the design year, we're estimating the treatment facility based on the growth of EDUs to be 85% full in 2030, or about 2030. That's followed by 100% ERU capacity in 2032, all right? So the city will need more pond volume to properly treat and over the winter hold the wastewater. Spray irrigation wise, we hit the 85% mark in about 2035. So that has a little bit more flexibility on the timeline. If you want to start looking at improvements, again, remembering this takes 4 or 5 years, roughly at that 80 to 85% capacity threshold, now's the time to start looking at a pond expansion. Okay. And we'll go on to Appendix G. So to summarize some of the proposed improvements that we're recommending, on the south end, we're showing replacing the headworks or control building. It's really served its useful life. It needs to be replaced. There's also an existing garage that should be replaced. Ponds 1A and 1 will get new aeration mixers. These are things that have short salvage or short service life, as all pumps do, and need to be replaced more often. Another big component to this is to add a new pond in the northeast corner. That'll provide better winter storage and treatment capacity for growth. That'll be the final pond in the wastewater treatment train, so to speak. And the effluent from the pond will get pumped back to the spray irrigation fields. So the estimated project cost for these recommended improvements at this point in time is just under 4.7 million. We'd have to see where the inflation takes that in terms of construction prices by the time these improvements are designed and constructed. So remember, we're estimating out around 2030 for 85% and 2032 for 100%. Spray irrigation wise, a little bit more time there to handle that particular piece of the puzzle. We could possibly replace trees with a cover crop as an option. Cover crop would usually take up more water than trees. So we could have flow increases, but be able to absorb more water with what you have out there in terms of acreage right now. But this would require planting and harvesting each year, so that adds a little more work to the program. Or we could look at expanding irrigation pipes and sprinkler heads and move out into some of the other acreage that the city owns and look at expanding that way. Okay. When you think about these improvements, it doesn't take long to get to $1 million in spending toward these improvements. So just to conclude this summary, the plan, the design, the bidding, and the construction phases, remember 4 to 5 years it takes to get to that point. The longer it takes to make decisions, the issues don't go away. They're still there. And if you're growing, that kind of adds to the picture. And these things don't get less expensive, they get more expensive. These are estimates. We'll be looking at treatment facility capacity issues by the beginning of the next decade. You should be budgeting roughly $5 million in our estimation at this point in time for your wastewater fund. And we can go through any or all of the information that we presented here if you have questions.
Question, you said it's a 4 to 5 year process. At some point, after design is completed, does it have to go to the MPCA for a review?
Yes.
And I would imagine that takes a while.
A facility plan, typically most cities do not have $5 million readily available, just to be blunt. And so when this goes down a typical funding track, the first thing you do is complete a facility plan first to get MPCA approval of what you're proposing to do, but that also is a requirement by the funding agencies, so that opens up that window for the city. And those are typically like PFA, Public Financing Authority will fund infrastructure projects like this, or USDA Rural Development's another program. There are others.
So then the $5 million, how many years, I mean, do you have to have that upfront as soon as the project, or is it phased?
You could phase into that. The big costs are going to be in the construction. Design does cost something, but typically most cities are, it depends on the city. If you have the funds available to cover design up front, or if you have to start thinking about financing right off the bat.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Nothing for me.
Had enough wastewater for one night?
So generally, I guess next steps with this, again, as Dave said, this is generally a multi-year, it takes time. Dave, I know we've talked, I think, with Joe and Tim Hool before about just getting the facility plan approved by the MPCA can take up to a year, right? Like
Possibly.
That's a time-consuming process as well. And as Dave said before, you can really, before you probably even want to go into design, you want to make sure that they're okay with your plan. So, generally, I think the next steps would be have MPCA, submit the plan. If you're comfortable with the plan, submit the plan to MPCA to get their blessing on it. Same thing as Dave said, next, talking about the financing, the budget piece. That's what we've talked about in the past of now that we have the study and the recommended or the engineer's estimate on a cost, to take that and send it to like a Baker Tilly, have them analyze that, essentially do a rate study for us, what's in our, have them look at, our sewer fund, operation of our sewer fund, what's in our capital fund, how much this is gonna cost. They can do the, okay, if we're doing this in 2028, 2030, whenever we wanna do it, what do we think inflation might look like? And then they can give us a number of, okay, over the next 5 years, this is what you should do with your sewer rates. Maybe it's only like $5 a year per quarter or something. They'll make that recommendation based off of the cost of what we need to do this project, how much money we have, how much money you want to keep on hand for other projects like we're going to talk about next. So those would be, I think, in my mind, kind of the next two steps. You could almost kind of run those simultaneously. Would be, start looking at getting approval from the MPCA if you're comfortable with this project, or if you want to talk about this project more. And then start looking at that financing piece. To your question, Steve, about do you have to have $5 million in cash up front to do the project? No, you could bond it. There are bonds specifically kind of for this project that are generally pretty easy because it's backed up. The sewer fund is considered an enterprise fund, so it's backed up by rates, sewer rates. So those bonds are generally pretty easy to issue and to get and have decent rates. As Dave said, there's other funding entities out there that also have benefits of lower rates or different things like that. If you qualify, they have qualifying things. And I've looked into those a little bit already as well. So those are different. A lot of those, PFA or USDA, a lot of times they're low interest loans, so they're not necessarily grants. Cities have also submitted for, state bonding for projects like this. Obviously, state bonding is always a shot in the dark. They couldn't pass one this session, so you never know with that one. Cities have also used, in the past, local option sales taxes. That's what Brainerd and Baxter's local option sales tax goes, is to fund the wastewater treatment plant down there. Obviously, there's a moratorium on that right now. Still is. The state legislature didn't address that in this session, so still a moratorium on that until next year. But there are opportunities beyond just pure sewer rates and what we have, we can look at as well.
Have we looked at, I know a lot of the new construction, they're putting in like septics, right? So have we looked at the population rate or that growth, like what percentage of actual new construction is connected to city sewer? But then also like, is there a cap? Have we kind of said like Breezy's only so big that, is there a population cap that you think that we would kind of stop growing at and just more so be sustainable at that population?
So I think what Woodseth did, first of all, is what you have is based off of what we currently have. So based off of the number of, I think, stubs that are out there, we have 146 available. Is that right, Dave? Did I get that right? How many?
Yeah, 164 is what I had for 2023.
Is that we don't even have enough capacity to serve what we have.
That'd be correct.
So if every stub or ERU available got filled, we actually don't even have enough capacity in our current plant to serve without expanding. And I think part of the reason we've seen that is, as they talked about in the study, and Joe alluded to as well, there's a disconnect, if you read the full study, between what the ponds were designed for and what's actually happening. And I think that was actually a big part of what Joe Zieren and Joe Dubel had to work through and Tim Hool had to work through, is because the engineers were going, well, the ponds should be plenty big, and Joe's going, well, go out there. They aren't. And so there was that disconnect of the design versus what's actually coming in. And as a somewhat, as a seasonal community, what also affects that is we see seasonal properties become full-time properties. That increases, the more seasonal properties become full-time properties, affects our winter storage. So that's to your question, Madam Mayor, I guess. Part of it is there a cap eventually? Yes, just look at our lots, estimate how many of them are physically buildable, and eventually you get to a number. But the issue we have here is that we just don't have enough capacity for the system that exists today.
I'm not super educated on this, but I know that Brainerd, there are some talks about looking at the methane and how do you capture that for renewable energy. Have we looked at any possibilities for the city in the future
So
to
the
look at
difference
renewable?
with Brainerd is a mechanical plant.
Okay.
So I think they were the only mechanical plant in essentially that area.
There are others, but Cross Lake has a mechanical plant.
Okay, mechanical, okay.
Can you talk about that quick? Like why we chose this form of, I don't know all the other form. Yeah, a treatment. What is kind of the difference? I'm just curious, because if that's kind of the direction, I know there's, when it comes to clean energy and renewable, obviously there's a lot of grant funding available for those things. So do we have any opportunities to look at that for the future, Breezy, or is this kind of our only option that we're?
It would be easier with mechanical plant to think about how to capture things like methane. Typically you'd have something, what's called a digester that's enclosed, that you can capture that type of product off of it and use it for heating the facility or creating electricity, that kind of thing. Funding agencies have Green Project Reserve and other things that they'll give a credit toward a project that is taking advantage of something like that. Would you change your treatment facility in Breezy Point to something like a mechanical plant in order to try to make that happen? Probably not.
Okay.
It would probably be.
So this is what we're stuck with this, and there's no.
You can always add mechanical treatment to a program like this. One of the things that a pond system has in terms of advantages over a mechanical plant is the seasonal swings that you have from the type of community that you are, going from spring, summer, all the seasonal flows that vary widely, from one part of the year to the next. A pond system generally can absorb, you know, a fairly rapid change in influent flow rates. You know, it's just that winter period of storage that kind of gets the operators a little nervous sometimes when they start to see that pond level getting up there. A mechanical plant works best when it has a steady stream of water coming through. What comes in goes out, right? So here you can buffer those peak flows a little bit better with a pond.
So in a sense, a seasonal community like us probably would not consider mechanical.
Right now,
Teach their
we
own,
don't
but-
see the advantage unless it would be due to a specific chemistry of influent that's coming in that needed some advanced treatment for some particular parameter.
Min-
Sounds correct, Dave. And I mean, historically, our wastewater is domestic, low strength, not hard to handle. You know, in my opinion, if you change from what we have, it's gonna be cost. I mean, it will be more expensive to operate, guarantee it, and,
Crosslake is actually having a problem with their capacity.
They have, did they add mechanical to their,
They only have mechanical.
they only had mechanical?
Yep, and they have a major capacity issue right now. It's gonna be like a $4 million project to even handle what they currently have.
Okay. When did they, I'm curious, do you know when they implemented the mechanical in Cross Lake? What,
Early 2000s.
It was 2002, 2003.
what'd they do before that?
They had no wastewater collection or treatment system.
And what did that result
All
in?
on-sites. It was all on-site systems, so
Oh, okay. There's no city sewer is what you're saying, okay.
And I will add too, just with like Brainerd, so Brainerd Public Utilities serves, they both, Brainerd and Baxter, so it's a very large plant, but part of the reason they do mechanical is they also discharge into the Mississippi.
Okay,
So when we aren't discharging into a body of water, so that helps us. If you discharge into a body of water, you have to have the extra level of treatment that Dave mentioned earlier that we thankfully don't have to have because we spray on crop or sandy soils and such as well, that it never, the water, and plus where the water table is, we don't really have any concerns of ever having issues. Where with Brainerd, because they do discharge in the Mississippi, they have to get it way, 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 way down.
so if you look to the future, let's just say we kind of max out our capacity for our population within our area, what does this look like, right? If, I mean, I'm not gonna hold you to it, but like if you had to like guess, like at whatever population that you end at after, because you said you did like 20-year projection, what does this look like then? Is it just the fact that we're gonna continue to add ponds? Or is there gonna need, what does it look like?
more than likely at this stage of the game and, you know, trying to see 20 to 30 years out, we still look at ponds as being a highly considered option for the city.
Like how many, is what I meant, like, I mean, is it gonna fill the whole space? Like, are we gonna continue every, 5 to 10 years adding a pond? I'm just curious
The
what
last
that,
pond we haven't added was about 20 years ago.
Oh, okay.
So we're gonna be about, by the time this pond, if it gets built, we'll be about 20, I think, was it 03, Joe, the last pond was added? Is that what that said?
yep.
So about
the first
27
pond-
years.
The little primary pond on the bottom left was our last pond that was added, which didn't really significantly address winter storage. The pond on the southeast corner, Pond 4, was built in '99, which is, 20 years roughly. The pond, that we would be looking at now, very similar size, very similar capacity. The big surge of wastewater, at least at our system, was the late 90s. It's been fairly static. I mean, during COVID, we lost 20%. And it's kind of snapped back to where it was. But, predicting the future is tricky, but I'd say, 20 years, we'd probably have another, 20 years after the pond, might have a different discussion. But
I think also you will look at the actual expansion of the system, the sewer system. Daniel, if you were to go back to the first one that actually showed where all the lines are, the sewer line map. You know, I don't think it's necessarily realistic to assume that eventually the entire city will have sewer. You know, just look in the Whitebridge 15, 16 area, that area with its topography, to put sewer up there realistically would, you know, you'd be looking at lift stations, what, every block. It'd be extremely expensive to get sewer into the areas like that. Plus with the size of the lots and stuff, there really is no need to get sewer there. So that's where you know, there are areas I think we can talk about, you know, we're gonna talk about an area of a potential expansion, but I think they're much smaller. You know, I think at some point we might have to have a discussion. The MPCA might be kind of guiding us on having that discussion about OSSI. Again, that has to do with getting private systems off of the water. So it'd be more of that preserving the lake perspective than just getting more sewer. So, you know, I don't necessarily see, and then even in the next 20, 30 years, you know, where is it going to expand? That'll be discussion, but it's not going to be probably across the city of 100% sewage. So that's also something to consider. We will never be at probably 100% sewage capacity, or sewage. Every lot has sewer.
So now that we have the cost to expand this system, that local sewer survey, April 2024, of the cost of each city, we're significantly less for a quarterly fee. And now that we know we have this dollar amount, and actually we push the most gallons for treatment of any of these or adjoining cities, I think it's a good document. So I know the sewer fees quarterly, I think it was raised $5. Well, what does that get us yearly?
So $5 a quarter per ERU.
That's right.
Again, we have 1,400 ERUs or connections right now. You're talking 25 bucks $20 a year. It's getting us it got us an extra, like, what is that, 30 grand? To find very basic math.
Are you saying it should be increased more than?
I don't know, but I think it's a discussion. You
Yeah.
know, how are we gonna, pay for this?
That's where that rate
Because
study would come
inflation
in.
too, right? Like you have to
Yeah.
account for that, so I think
Yeah,
that's
that's
a
where that
discussion.
rate study that I spoke to would come into play, is looking at, okay, how much is coming in? They'd look at how much is coming in, what is our average expenditure, kind of what are we netting, what do we have in the bank, what's it gonna cost to do this, and also plan for the future of, you know, we have to replace it in the future or just make improvements. So what do we need to do over maybe the course of the next 5 or 6 years? Because you don't want to necessarily have to do a high jump of like maybe $5, whatever it needs to be. Where do we need to get, and then how do we get there?
My other question too, you said the last pond that was put in is the smallest one, right? 20 years ago. Why did they make it so small? Like what?
Because it's a primary treatment pond.
Is
So
this one not gonna be this
No,
for, okay,
this would be a storage pond.
Okay.
Essentially what happened is our primary treatment pond that we had, it had submerged diffusers, oxygen diffusers. They were not working well. Let's just put it like that. Odors, sludge problems, because the primary treatment is essentially you're increasing the organic population artificially by increasing the air. So they consume the organic material quickly in that small pond and settle out. That's what sludge is. It's dead bacteria, bugs, that sort of thing.
kind of like in the septic systems, in your own septic system, you create the sludge?
Opposite of a septic system.
Okay.
A septic system operates without oxygen.
Okay,
Much slower process. If you operate with oxygen, I guess a good analogy would be take a piece of wood, throw it in the woods, and it'll rot. That's kind of similar to no oxygen. Now take a piece of wood, put it in a fire. That's what we're trying to achieve in our primary system ponds. And that's why they're smaller, because that size was appropriate to handle the load it required. So, and our old aerators they were not performing great, and that pond kind of transitioned to a storage pond. The upgrades we're talking about now would transition that back to an additional primary treatment pond, because I have been seeing indications that our 6 aerators running is a new development in the last couple of years to keep odors where they need to be. And then if I have to use the old system, it's not functional.
Is there a way to know that the size of this new pond that we're proposing is going to last the like full breadth of the population growth and sewer expansion, or do we know where we would actually need to in the future add another one?
There's been discussions. Property to the east has been identified as a good property to look at. It currently has 1 home. Properties that are contiguous to the sewer plant are going to make future upgrades and additions cheaper, essentially, because we're not piping and getting rid of spray field and moving ponds on old spray field. Like our current primary treatment pond, we lost some spray field when that pond was put in place because it was spray field. They cut it off, put it there because that works. Because the primary treatment, that's where the water starts, and that's.
Are the spray fields tested to make sure that the ponds are doing their job?
The spray fields are not. The wastewater right at the pump, and how we test them is we test for fecal coliform bacteria. It's a bacteria that lives in warm-blooded animals.
Right.
We need to be 200 colonies or less to pass. We've pretty much always made it. I mean, if we can't meet that, we don't get an award. And the sewer system is 40-some years old, and we have 41 awards. So our performance is very good for a simple system. I mean, honestly, I think you couldn't probably design a better system for our flow characteristics. It requires lower maintenance, good treatment, not full-time operation, handle surges like Dave pointed out. I know in Cross Lake, that's an issue. Mm-hmm. Their flows triple to 4 times in the weekend. That produces a shock because the bacteria, they're overloaded with food and they can't handle it, and it just makes it more labor intensive running a mechanical plant. Nisswa system, pretty much not carbon copy of our system, but very similar, performs well. When I was there, Pequot, they use aerated ponds. It's a good system for weekend surges, and it's performed very well for us.
And I think too, kind of what Joe and Dave have referred to of, this is kind of that first recommendation for the storage, gives us what we need, I think now and for the future, for all we were gonna have. And then that next step would be also look at the aeration, because that also helps. Again, as Joe said, we are limited to how much they can spray at any time. And pretty much the rate they can spray, and that's determined by the cover crop, which right now is forest. So if you change the cover crop to, say, grass or something else, you can then spray more effluent. So that allows you to also keep the capacity low by how much you can spray. So that would be just upgrading, changing the cover crop, maybe upgrading again the system, and not necessarily expanding the spray fields, just changing what you're spraying on. So there's a lot of steps you can take before you're actually having to look at acquiring more. So again, we are in a great, from the city planning ahead, in a great spot where we have a lot of areas that we can expand without having to necessarily acquire more.
If you want to know the history of how the Cross Lake system came about, I'm probably date myself, but I was there at the beginning of this stage of facility planning the Cross Lake system and what areas would be served. what type of treatment system it would be. And our recommendation for Cross Lake at the time was a pond system. And it didn't go that way. It went to a mechanical treatment system and discharged to the river for a lot of different reasons. But that's what they have, and it was designed for 150,000 gallons per day. And their impetus for what areas do we serve, it was to protect the lakes, serve the areas that are abutting the lakes and get the on-site systems closed. So if you want to know the history a little deeper, I can tell you.
I know we've talked a little bit about this, but just going back to, you mentioned sewers, a capital fund, enterprise, sorry. So this is not tax levy dollars, this is user fees paying for said system, correct? David?
Sorry, say that again.
Yep. This is not a tax levied item, this is a
Correct. So
enterprise
this is
fund, this
an
is
enterprise
user-based
fund. So, yep,
funds.
it's a user fee, so those connected pay fees that we use to operate, those that do not have sewer do not pay to the operation of the sewer fund.
Do we know the fees of the cities around us or Brainerd or
Yep,
other?
so
just-
Joe's got, it included that, for all the like us.
110.
When it comes to places like Brainerd, that's metered. So it's based off of your actual usage versus these other cities, it's a straight fee, per month or per quarter.
Do they increase though? Like, do we know like how much they've increased those?
They do increase them, I don't know what they're at now.
Okay.
When I was on Brainerd Sewer, on the average month, I was probably paying, I guess they kind of combined, there was always one big bill, but I was paying, I think between probably close to 40 to 50 bucks a month for sewer in Brainerd.
We charge by the quarter, which is every 3 months, so.
So they're probably about double, right now they're probably about double what we are, if you do look at a month. But again, it's a metered. And again, they have it where it's a very kind of a flat where, for the first, I don't quote me the numbers, but say like first 5,000 gallons, it's X amount, and then per 1,000 gallons after that, it's an X amount, so.
I know there was a point in the study somewhere that said that we don't have people seasonally disconnecting because the reconnect would be at a higher rate. What is, maybe I missed it, but what is that seasonal reconnect if we did have anybody?
I want to say like $5 more than just paying the rate.
Do you believe, does it serve a potential if we raise the rates too much that people may take advantage of that? Or is that something more discussed about the rate study?
Yeah, I would say probably discuss it with that, when we do that rate study. I guess, Joe, you would know more of how unique we are in allowing that, like, seasonal disconnect.
That's gonna be my next question.
You move to other cities, you pay whether you use it or not.
We heard the question as well. Generally, seasonal people don't like to pay for year-round services if they can. But when you're talking about sewer, that's a sticky wicket because they say, well, we don't want to use it, but they can, they may. It's an attempt at an accommodation, but I would agree with David. I mean, it's not a great practice.
Yep.
Yes. Where it would benefit someone is,
At no fee.
no, they pay a fee that, so
What is it?
let's say, I want to say it's 80. I would have to look up for sure. But the typical scenario I've heard, I don't know, dozens of times, is they want to leave September-ish, which would be the third quarter, and be back by, the first quarter. So they miss 2 quarters. The way our fee works out, it is cheaper to stay connected and pay for it than disconnect for 2 quarters. Because it's, they have to dig up their yard, cap the sewer line. It doesn't make a ton of sense. However, there has been a few individuals that kept their home, decided to move away, drained the water line, disconnected for a couple years. I think that was part of the history of why it's still there. I don't think it's, it can just lead you into problems because if someone disconnects it, it's not that hard to reconnect a sewer. I mean, it's, a lot of times it comes not very far, like if you have that slab at grade home, that sewer line is not that deep. A shovel, I mean, you dig it up, cut the cap off, slide a coupler on it, cover it up, nobody sees you, now you're set up for free sewer forever. So that's why I wouldn't do it. But we do have it on place, and I think it does, you know, it prevents most folks from trying to disconnect during winter and rehook up.
Are those homes that overlook the resort? I don't know the street name. Are they, Circle Drive, are they on sewer?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
that's what I thought.
And that actually was the location of one of the homes that was not connected for about 2 or 3 years.
Well, most of those aren't year-round. I mean, they don't,
Correct. Most of them have seasonal water through the
Yeah,
resort, so that
exactly.
kind of limits their use. Although wells are starting to be put up there.
okay.
What do other cities do with seasonal or like disconnect? Do they allow it, not allow it?
I would say not, as far as I'm aware, not allow it. I mean, like
Yeah,
David
I don't
said,
think-
that's,
Is that just
Kind of.
unique to Breezy because of,
it's unique because it was a frequent request and they,
And to be clear, the whole term shut off is a little bit of a misnomer. Like we can't really actually like shut off your sewer unless we go and like pretty much like cap your pipe. So it's not like water where if you have municipal water, they can literally go and like turn the key and you lose water.
right?
Sewer doesn't operate like that.
Is it better to just not have disconnects and,
Yeah, so when we say disconnect, essentially what we're doing is just not billing you.
right, because I mean, technically, couldn't they
to
still?
not get billed, you have to cut the pipe.
Yeah.
And we got to inspect it, so that's,
But
they're
doesn't that
essentially
take
cutting
time
the-
out
They're
of?
essentially cutting the pipe. It's not just a little like turn the faucet
I'd like to
off.
know how many disconnects we have and like look at, is it really something we want to continue to do from a time perspective?
That's
And
something we could look at, especially with a rate study as well, because that would affect that study is, if we have, how many disconnects do we have and,
I'm aware of one.
yeah.
Oh, okay. One?
In length of time? One in how many years?
One
Many?
present, and then on Circle Drive, a second one. And then there was on, right by Lift Station 3, there was that Pentagon kind of odd-shaped house like 10 years ago that got demolished, so we capped that sewer line. Like we've capped sewer lines when structures are removed sometimes. But it's a question, it's not frequent.
Okay, yeah, I thought it was more than that. Yeah. Good to know.
So I guess at this stage, the question would be, how would you like to proceed? Do you want to move into the next phase of getting MPCA approval of this plan? We did budget to have Woodseth kind of do that on our behalf. If you wanted to do that we'd get Dave, Nick, would draft up an agreement, and then we'd bring that to a council meeting. And then same thing with the rate study, we could then take this, engage again with Baker Tilly, have an agreement for Baker Tilly to do that study. Based on what I've talked to them in the past, that study would probably a rate study with them would probably be in the, don't quote me, but I'm thinking it's about the $7,500 range. Again, that would be paid out of the sewer fund.
I think we should proceed with both. I mean, infrastructure, we need to maintain and improve and expand. I mean, that's one of our primary jobs. And it's important that we do it.
Would say benefit of, I'll just say the rate study about starting that now, is that we would have the results back in time to talk about yet this year in case, if you wanted to implement something in 2020, start implementing it in 2025, now would be a good time to kick that off and be able to have them do the study, get it back, discuss how you want to implement, to be able to implement in 2025 if you wanted to.
Yeah, I agree.
I'd like to see those in June, if possible.
Okay.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that leads us to our second topic of tonight, which is the potential extension of the sewer system from Airport Road to Terminal or even Red Oak Lane. This was first brought up in, Joe, when did we bring this first up? It was like January, February, beginning of the year? End of the year? I can't remember when this first got brought up.
I think last fall.
Yeah, maybe it was last fall. The impetus of this discussion is the development that's working on, that Mr. Wiebolt is working on building a new building for the Ace Hardware, relocating the Ace Hardware there just west of the Commander. And so Joe's got a lot of that history there in his memo. But again, there is an opportunity. We saw that Joe saw it as an opportunity to, again, bring sewer, pretty cheap when it comes to sewer, to potential terminal and Red Oak. Advantages of this is if we get sewer down terminal and Red Oak, again, those areas have much smaller lots that right now under the current zoning and such, to get a septic on them, you're gonna need, 3, potentially 4 lots to build on them, which I think has been is hampered development on those streets, where if you put sewer on them, you need a lot less lot space than if you would have a septic, because you don't have to account for the septic at that point. So that was kind of I think the reason why we originally brought this up. It would also benefit Mr. Wieboldt's development, because then it's also a lot of less space that they have on their property that they need a septic system for, which then gives them more flexibility for the future if they want to expand that operation or do something else with their property. So with that, I think I'll hand it over to Joe and Nick to kind of talk about, and then the council authorized back, I think it was November, January, somewhere around there, to have with Seth look at what was the feasibility and costs. So I'll turn it over to Joe and to Nick.
Sure. I tried to take Nick's report and break it into the simplest options that give a couple different ways to share costs. We could start with like option 1, for example. That would just bring sewer service to the intersection of Terminal Road. That would be it. And when we're talking about future lots, that's going down the road when reconstruction, honestly, that, to keep costs lower right now, and the timing of it, that can be a delayed discussion. But if the sewer line doesn't get to the intersection now, based on building, that could be a roadblock in the future if we can't get it there right now. Option 1, that is like a trunk line cost, and it shows the city cost, the developer cost to just go to terminal. Option 1A is is going to Terminal and Red Oak Lane, trunk line, and that shares the developer cost, the city cost, and then the total project estimated costs. These are all estimated costs. Option 1 and 1A are most consistent with the cost sharing we've done on previous sewer projects, where we have like trunk lines where we bored under County Road 11, participated in costs. The White Birch area where we had sewer lines crossing neighborhoods and things like that. That approach similar has been taken in the past to try and, not put all the cost on the property owners. Option 2 is a different way to split the cost, and that's going by ERU, because I realize the first 2 options, the developer cost is quite high. The ERU cost is essentially trying to say what the property is going to use. Like the estimated size of the structure, I believe is like 9,000 square feet. That'd be approximately 3 ERUs. But if they change it, those costs could swing, like if they put in something that used 20 ERUs, the cost would be quite a bit more than either one of the first options. The intention was to give a way to give a cost difference to hopefully get the project going. And then, option 2 is just going to terminal, and then option 2A is terminal in Red Oak. Those are the costs there are based on our estimates. Some other options you have would be do no action, further negotiate with the developers. That's something we've done in the past as well. And then, of course, there's a 100% assessment option that is available. It's not something. And then the breakdowns, like on the little charts, those are Nick did the estimates. So at this point, if you have any questions for me, any questions for Nick, the developers are here.
So option 2 and 2A, for the construction of a hardware store, you have to take that developer cost times 3? That's per ERU?
That was already calculated at approximately 3
Okay,
ERUs.
okay.
So if they'd, change the footprint, change the size, doing that route would make it adjustable.
I've always been in favor of making it more affordable for developers. I think there is a big advantage for cities when we do that versus putting all of the costs on them. So I think I would be in favor of looking at some of the lower costs for the developer.
Generally, it was the first 2 options but most realistically, it was option 6. That would be where we'd start. We would start with a trunk line, and then there's gonna be negotiation, discussion, with the people involved.
You said the developer's here? I'd like to hear from you guys on just what your project costs and what you would like to see. Obviously, you don't want to pay more than you have to, but I would like to at least hear from you guys.
So our issue right now is, honestly, option 1 really is not feasible for us because we actually have 3 more lots to work with impervious surface. And at that point, we also can do impervious pavement at that point, or even ask for right now you're required so many parking spots for the size of the building, which right now for a hardware store, I can tell you what you guys require is way more than we'll ever need there. We'll have a whole bunch of dead, empty spaces. So even at that point, we create more green space. So going back to the first option, doing those other things, I'd rather put in a sewer system instead of being hooked up. The option 2, I would be interested in looking at, just because at that point it would be beneficial on both sides at that point, because at that point you can also get the other properties hooked up down Terminal Road and Red Oak.
And your name?
Michael Wallman.
Okay.
Mike Weeble cannot make it today. I've been working with Mike since '99, so
Okay.
I've been part of the development on all this. Any other questions or concerns? I will say right now that with just our bathroom at Breezy It is minimum use, just versus our convenience store at Pelican Square. The new building will have 2 bathrooms and just a small little kitchen area for the staff. So the usage on DRU is very minimal.
Perfect, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, I would absolutely be more in favor of option 2 or 2A than I would on, because we already had discussed looking at even reducing our assessment too, in general, as a potential for the future, so that would be my.
Madam Mayor, if I may. Mr. Willing, where are you at this point in the development timeline?
We are hoping,
Yeah, that'd be great.
we are hoping to break ground in the fall of 2025. Just right now, we picked up Swanson's Bait and Tackle, and we were going to switch the old hardware store into a sporting goods shop. So we want to get the Swanson's thing, the bait side figured out, so we pushed it back a year. We were hoping this fall, but realistically, to get everything in line and done correctly, we want to push it off to the fall of 2025.
I prefer at this point, since we have plenty of time to do option 6. I think option 1 and 1A, the developer cost is high. But I think with option 2 and 2A, I think that price could come up somewhat. But I don't want to, have to see the developers put in septic system either. I don't think that makes any
Right.
sense. I mean, they should have sewer, but I would just like to see option 6.
Can I ask another question? Do you know what your cost would be if you put in your own septic? I'm just curious of what that looks like.
I think we've done something somewhat recently, and it would be probably about the $25,000 range. But at that point, we aren't paying for a monthly fee either at that point.
For the monthly fee for,
The city use
oh, okay.
Or a connection charge.
or connection charge.
Do we know what that is yet?
The connection charge?
Well,
monthly fee.
the monthly
So
fee.
that'd be, we would bill quarterly, $75 per ERU.
Oh,
so
it's the
times-
same for commercial as
Yep.
for, okay, okay.
So, yeah, they're just based off of,
It would be based on the valuation, how many ERUs the structure is. So 9,000 square feet commercial would be,
Even go up to 4, and it's not, I'm just saying if we went to 10,000 square feet or,
it would be about 3.
Yep.
But without doing a valuation, that was just, it's about the size, they could do things different. They could put a water park in, but that would change things.
yeah.
If the structure would use a lot more water, the valuation goes up. That's the,
So so it'd be $75 a quarter
times 3.
times, right?
So $225 a quarter is what they would pay. So 75 times per ERU. So if they have 3 ERUs, it's 25.
So long-term, it would be cheaper to do your own septic system,
Correct.
Yeah,
which
the-
doesn't benefit the city, right?
The
And so,
the difference I think between sewer is, they'd have to connect, cost of implementing it. The maintenance, there is less maintenance. You don't have to maintain it. You don't have to replace it in 20, whatever it is,
20
20
plus
plus years. You don't have to
years, yeah.
spend 25,000 again to replace it. So there's that less now.
It's also how you maintain it if you get it pumped every year like you're supposed
Yeah.
to.
I would love to, if you guys have just the long-term, fees of what it is, like if you were to do a septic system, like what do you think your fees would be, in 20 years versus like with changing it out or pumping it or whatever it is. But then if you were to, pay for the developer side of it with the
And plus the
fees.
hookup fee. What the hookup?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see those side by side to make
the
a,
hookup fee is, for each ERU, right now, presently, $3,250, so.
because it doesn't make sense to force you guys out of connecting when this could benefit a potentially, how many people, I mean, it's listed here.
And I think just the one other thing, just again, throughout this process, it's not just purely how much this, there's obviously the financials is the biggest piece, but the sewer also, there's also I think the hard part to calculate is by doing the sewer, they also there's a lot more land that they can have for future development as well, which also does benefit the city for tax-based purposes and as well. And so how the spell that there, that's gonna be one piece that's harder to quantify, is how much is that, and that's pretty much up to them of how much that's worth it to them.
Yeah, and that's what I would like to hear from you guys, is just like, what's worth it, and when are you gonna say, no, sorry, I'm not doing it, I'm just gonna put it in my own system? I mean, that's,
Maybe it's mutually beneficial, and to Councilman Jensen's point, you look at option 6,
Right.
and then that allows you that ability to
Yeah.
negotiate.
that would be good.
On the pervious coverage, I mean, it's a big benefit to go from 25 to 50, you know, being on
Oh, it
the
is,
sewer.
but
I mean,
right now, with our development and what we're looking at right now, if we had the 50%, we could actually not use 3 lots right now that we currently bought.
so that would be a big benefit. then.
So, but at that point, if we had to, those 3 lots,
Sure,
not to be mean, I can do impervious pavement,
correct.
and at that point, I could do this,
Right.
our own thing again,
Okay.
without being hooked up.
Yeah, I'm good with option 6. Just continue the conversation.
Yep, and we'll continue to work with Mr. Wallin and Mr. Weebolt and,
Mr. Walling, and make a deal.
Yeah, I think that.
You know, and one of the things that, you know, just to bring up is, I know this is what we're all thinking, but just to state it, is in this area, Terminal, Red Oak, West, there's a lot of the small, currently undevelopable lots because of the impervious, the reasons for septic. So kind of goes back to the original request, which I don't think it made it, but on this latest memo is to use this as a demo area to see if we do bring sewer down these. And granted, this is not bringing sewer down the road, it's just at least getting there. So once we get our road study done and when we know we got to replace those roads, sewer can be done. So just prepping ourselves for the future. So that's where there is a benefit to the city to do something along those
I
lines.
think the commercial lots alone, like that you're bringing
And all
it
that.
We own all
toward
the-
those would
Right
be-
there, we have all the commercial lots. Besides that one house that's in behind us, we have all the commercial lots, the rest of it are residential.
Correct, but Red Oak Lane
Red
also
Oak has
Red Oak
quite a
going up
few.
yeah. And I will add too, that again, this is the benefit discussion to have, is as we're commencing the zoning rewrite process, if we know that the chances are we're looking at to put sewer down Terminal in Red Oak, that influences how potentially we write the code or those areas. Because then again, with if you have sewer, then you can have lower, smaller lot sizes. You can look at, what kind of setbacks do we want there, density and stuff. So you definitely write the zoning standards for a sewered lot a lot differently than you do a septic lot.
I have a question on the 2A. Just curious, this was just purely numbers, right? You're just basing it on the ERU?
Yep.
Okay.
And it's not the typical way I've ever done it, but it allowed more room for discussion
Okay.
and compromise. And also for those small lots, another thing that is important is that would be gravity sewer lines. Anytime you add a lift station, you're adding $1 million, $500,000. So it'd be the lowest cost way I can think of to get a sewer line to that neighborhood of small lots to see what it does.
Yeah. That's a good point too that Councilman Maroney made. There's value in that.
Because there is an LLC on Red Oak Lane that owns a substantial amount of property
Oh, okay.
based on Amora. I talked to Peter today.
I guess of all the options, one thing to clear up would be just go to Terminal in Red Oak. I think it would make more sense to go to Terminal in Red Oak because it'd most likely be a boring job. I think that would be the most cost effective to look at for the city's future.
Right.
And before we develop the property.
Yes.
I don't think there'd be a reason to stop at Terminal. If we're gonna do it, it's gonna go to Red Oak.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would agree.
And I will say this probably already, doesn't necessarily need to be stated, but I know Joe's already worked with, so this would be Crow Wing County right away we'd be in. I know he's already worked with the county and their comfortable.
It shouldn't be a problem, I hope. The one other criteria, I guess, is, or thing to keep in mind is, if we can get an agreement made, to have it bid in spring, that would be a major benefit to the cost of the project. Trying to do them midsummer, like if we don't get the spring bidding, generally that's when you get your best prices. Like, it was fortunate that they delayed construction because it may help us quite a bit. So, Nick, could you perhaps discuss a little bit about the process? Let's say we make an agreement on cost. What does that look like as far as the meetings we have to hold and everything to get to biddable project?
Might be a little bit more help as far as the process.
So going through like a chapter 429 assessment procedure for special benefit being the sewer, that takes a series of resolutions by the city council, which can take about, probably on average, about 3 months to get through. That's kind of on a, if everything goes smoothly. There's an improvement hearing initially where we review the costs, the scope of project, how you're proposing to distribute the costs, who would be assessed, and so forth. We take all of that information and go through the steps, okay? So there's a lot of detail and rules associated with Chapter 429 assessment procedure, but you know, I'm sure David's familiar with it, and we are too, so we can help the city get through it. It's good timing to start thinking about starting that process, like Joe said, so that you can get through those steps and then get to a design phase where you can have a bid package ready to go out sometime December, January. That's kind of the time frame.
All right. Anybody else? Anything? Thank you. I think.
Okay, so that's all. So unless there's anything else from the council on either of these two topics, that's what we had for this evening.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.